they're all honorable.
That's right.
But at the same time, like many of people who've given their lives for a cause or a movement, it's the family that suffers,
That's
right? And Rajat suffered, his siblings
Right.
suffered. So,
Right. Right.
you know.
I think he did have sort of a schizophrenic view, if you will, of his father. I think on one hand it was hard not to admire his father because his father's freedom fighting eventually assured him a place in post-independence India's pantheon. His father was a friend of Nehru. Nehru used to actually call Ashwini by his first name. Rajat couldn't decry, his father, and yet, I think, as you say, he talked about how his father was the kind of man who would, if someone asked him for the shawl off his back, he would give him the shawl, and he would give him every last penny he had, and he said on one hand, that was a very noble thing, but on the other hand, we, the family, in some way,
Deprived us.
yeah.
Yes, yes. So,
I mean, sorry,
yes,
I was just going to say that, but there's something, I mean, we're trying, even with fiction or non-fiction, you're trying to explain why somebody does something. And I think that, though, what interests me was the idea that in some way human motive is inexplicable. And that there's something, you come to a point where you make a choice, and why you make the choice is sometimes not really explicable. And then the Buddhists say it's just your karma, It's just a way of justifying. I think often we don't, I found in my life, for example, I don't know why I made that choice. I could have taken two paths, but this one, I went on this one. And I find that interesting, whether we're trying to examine a real person or a character.
well, I mean, since we were discussing Rajat's relationship with his father, I know that Shivam's relationship with his mother is complicated, and she's a very sort of Dickensian character. Kind of Mrs. Havisham comes to mind, and they start off, they have a very close relationship, and then she betrays him.
You mean the grandmother?
Sorry, the grandmother.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Well, I find it funny how people sort of always revert to the Western canon to describe somebody. I didn't even think of Miss Havisham. I mean, I don't read Dickens because I don't really like his prose. But I mean, of course, I watch all the miniseries. But I just had this image.
I love Dickens, but
but
only on film.
I knew this woman who just sat on her bed the whole day and directed her life from her bed, directed the household and her business from her bed. So I thought, that was a starting image for the grandmother. I think the primary problem for Shivan, his mother, and the grandmother is that they love too much. And what they want, another human being can't provide. And I think the grandmother's big tragic flaw is that she loves Shivan too much. And that love becomes corrosive. And Shivan's tragic flaw is that he loves too much. And I think when we love too much, we want too much, when we crave too much, we're dangerous. We're dangerous to ourselves, but more important, we're dangerous to other people. And the novel has very strong Buddhist themes in it, as its title suggests, and I was very interested in that idea of tanha and craving. That is a sort of basic concept of Buddhism and how it plays out.
Well, you've adopted Buddhist philosophy into your life. I don't think you call yourself a Buddhist,
I
right?
don't call myself a Buddhist,
right.
because
But
it's a religion like any
yeah.
other, and in Sri Lanka it's a slightly horrendous religion, so I don't call myself a Buddhist.
Right, but your family background very much, you've got kind of Sri Lanka coursing through your veins in a sense, because you're a combination of Tamil and Sinhalese,
Yes,
right?
Yes,
So-
my parents had what was called a love marriage in their time, which was a highly forbidden thing. You never allow, you're not supposed to choose your own spouse. But my father was Tamil and my mother was Sinhalese. And my grandmother, my Tamil grandmother, was a strong Tamil nationalist and was one of those people who sat down on the road and demanded her rights. And so when her son turned around and said he was in love with a Sinhalese and wanted to marry her, you can only imagine what happened in the house. My father says that members of the Tamil party, including the president of the Tamil party, came to the house to tell him he should not do this. He should marry a Tamil woman, you know, and but you know, somehow they wanted to do this. And we grew up in this world, you know, with this mythical story of your parents who against great odds loved each other and made a home. And I think it's sort of, to me, I mean, it's a kind of, it was a wonderful family to grow up in.
So I mean, but all the more tragic what's gone on in Sri Lanka, because you know you epitomize what could have been, right? And what maybe again after sufficient amount of time has passed.
Yeah, but don't forget the mother in the family in the book also marries a Tamil. She's Sinhalese and she marries a Tamil, and it's tragic. And the grandmother warns her about that. She says, you know, when the mother says, "I'm going to get married," she says, "You are marrying a Tamil who's a Christian. You know, like, what's wrong with you?" So it doesn't. I don't think love conquers all at all. I mean, at all. It's just I was lucky in my family that it was a happy marriage.
Well, I don't recommend you read all of these 3 books in a row, because you'll be thoroughly depressed. Because there are no, I mean, it's not like there are rainbows and happy endings at the end of all of them.
I disagree. I disagree.
I was going
It's
to say,
incredibly
I think
uplifting. I just had a thought about what you said, Shyam, about that excess of love, and that made me think about whether, you know, since we're talking about ambition, whether in all these cases ambition is also tied up with shame, because it seems as though, I mean, that excess of love that you talk about produces a deep sense of shame, because it's you know, to do with what we were talking about earlier about living up to some burden that's been placed on you. In this case, the burden is love. In Rajiv Gupta's case, the burden is someone not fitting into society, and the children, the son in particular, both. I think it's telling that in both these cases, it's the boy who shoulders the burden of that love or shame or whatever it is, and how that produces a really burning ambition to achieve something that society otherwise can't give them, be it money or love.
But is that, I mean, is that in a sense why people reinvent themselves, the way kind of, you know, Phoebe did, that, you know, the sense that I can't fit in the way I am, so I might as well assume a completely different identity?
I think that's certainly one of the reasons why they do it. That need to be someone else. That need to not be the son of a man who hasn't been able to fit into society. To be the son of someone who can love properly and not corrosively. To be, in Phoebe's case, someone who isn't looked down on because she hasn't got an education, because she hasn't got all the trappings that modern society says she should have. But it's also, I mean, we've talked about Phoebe, but there's also Walter, who is in a much more obvious way trying to live up to, or trying to compensate for the flaws, the shortcomings that his father has displayed all throughout his life, that fecklessness, that sort of incapability of dealing with money, with the formal trappings of success in modern Asia.
Well, that's a portrait in contrast. It's similar to, you know, Ashwini and Rajat, and you know, that he's the responsible one, right? And
yeah,
he's kind of the fixer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, some people have read my novel in terms of the idealism of Asia being subsumed or being crushed even by a more hard-headed sort of a brutal appreciation of money, a fascination with money, in fact. So, you know, there's Justin, but there's also Ying Hui, who, you know, was a poetry-loving kind of revolutionary or wannabe revolutionary, sort of very typical of middle-class kids of her generation, thought that she could and was going to change the world, and then 20 years down the line finds herself actually a businessman, a businesswoman, a very successful one at that. And it's all to do with what, you know, why people make the change, why people turn their backs on more idealistic ambitions, and why this notion of ambition in Asia today has become reduced to handbags or to cars, why it isn't a larger, more encompassing thing.
And that's very ironic. I mean, I think there's one line in the book, I'm paraphrasing, but it's, you know, it's a description of Phoebe's route to happiness, which is the acquisition of more and more and more, and nothing seems to be enough. And I think that's, in Rajat Gupta's case, you know, I mean, I can see a parallel, because here he is. He's, you know, 3-time CEO of McKinsey, okay? And, you know, he might have, you know, if he wasn't subject to term limits, which he brought in himself when he was CEO, he might have gone on because he was extraordinarily popular because of all the money that he was making the partners, you know? And then in terms of the society, you know, involved with Bill Gates in charity, you know, coming back to India, starting Indian Business School, which was ranked, I think, number 13 in the world. Just up, you don't fly much higher than that. And yet, it wasn't enough, right?
Yeah, I think for Rajat, a pivotal turning point in his life was actually moving to New York City. And I think, you know, it's hard to express what New York City is, but to people who haven't lived there. But it's all about power and money. And, you know, Rajat had spent most of his working life in Chicago and Scandinavia. I know in Scandinavia money is certainly not important. And in 1999, as he starts his 3rd term at McKinsey, at a time when his power is probably ebbing, this is going to be his final dance, if you will, he comes to New York City and he suddenly is swimming with people that have far more in terms of monetary wealth than he had. Yet he looks at himself.
I mean, it's billionaire versus millionaire, right?
Yeah, it's billionaire versus millionaire, and you know he buys an apartment in the Majestic building on Central Park West, and here's a man who. The 2 homes he had bought before he had moved to New York City, he had actually had friends pick the homes for him. So he'd never even seen the homes. And then he comes to New York and he buys the $5 million estate owned by James Cash Penney. And he's suddenly, you know, no longer the sort of selfless, non-materialistic man that he had painted himself to be. He's very much concerned about money, about the money he has and about the money that others have. And unfortunately, this move coincides with him actually coming into a time when he's going to be earning less money. He's stepping off the helm of McKinsey. And I think it's really this confluence of factors that suddenly takes a man who for 6 decades of his life had really lived a meritocratic career.
I think many of the comments about him is that, you know, he represented what's right about America. You know, in the sense that, you know, America should be a meritocracy, and he epitomized that, right? I mean, he was the guy who came from IIT, which itself is a meritocracy. I mean, there's, you know, even today, you know, the nepotism and what we see at Ivy League schools in the United States, in Europe, we don't see that at IIT, and so he's very well respected for that. And then, as you mentioned, he gets exposed to Rajaratnam and others. And this character is very interesting because he's a complete contrast to Rajat Gupta, who is handsome and polished and you know, debonair and sophisticated, and Rajaratnam is, you know, in terms of look and his comportment and his attitude, the complete opposite of that. He represents sort of Asian nouveau riche, but he's got just so much more money than Rajat. And so how does that make Rajat feel?
Yeah, you know, I think one of the things I learned, again, reporting on the book, is that Rajat just could not stomach the idea that here was someone who was overweight, dark-skinned, somewhat boorish, who was on the Forbes billionaire list, and here was Rajat, who was polished, well-coiffed, wore wonderful suits, and had a Rolodex that would be the envy of any of us. How someone like him, you know, had only 100 million to his name. And there are Rajat's own words that are actually quite prophetic. In April 2004, he's speaking to a class at Columbia University, and I managed to get a tape of this talk that he gave. And I just want to read you sort of a short bit from the book, because people often ask me, particularly South Asians, about, was it really just about greed? And I have to say, I think it was about greed. And I think Rajat, being as smart as he was, he knew it was about money. He's talking to Columbia, and he's asked about wealth, and he says, when I look at myself, yeah, I'm driven by money. I like many creature comforts. I want to make sure I take care of my kids well, and so on and so forth. And when I live in this society, you do get fairly materialistic. So I look at that. I'm disappointed. I'm probably more materialistic today than I was before. And I think money is very seductive. You have to watch out for it, because the more you have it, you get used to comforts, and you get used to, big houses and vacation homes and going and doing whatever you want. And so it is very seductive. However much that you say you'll not fall into the trap of it, you do fall into the trap of it.
So he was quite self-aware that this is what was happening to him, and yet he couldn't stop the transformation, right? I mean, I come back to this idea of the hungry ghost, that somebody who's lived their life with unfulfilled desires, and then what happens to them. I mean, that sounds like he would be, would fall into that category as a hungry ghost.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how we all live our lives. I mean, I think for me, Shivan is just an extreme example of all of us in a way. We can't actually be satisfied because there's no end to desire. I mean, there's just, whether it's sexual desire or desire for love, I mean, there's just no end to it. And I suppose that's where Buddhism provides the out from that. Sorry, Buddhism provides an out from that in a way. But I mean, yeah, I don't know what else to say. I mean, I think that shame, going back to the idea of shame, I think shame also really motivates Asian characters, whether fictional or real, into action. And I think it's sometimes not just the immediate shame, but also the generational shame that comes down to you, that certainly motivates Shivan into doing what he does. And I think you inherit a lot of stuff from your past that you don't even know that you carry with you. And I think that was also something that really, a theme I was very interested in exploring in Hungry Ghost.
I think everyone in Asia is brought up with shame. My parents obviously don't agree with this, but I mean, I have discussions with them about this, about how things get handed on, and it's that unknowing passing on of shame in some form or another. I mean, it can be on a national scale. So when a country like China, when you talk, we were talking earlier about how countries forget sort of in a very deliberate and calculated way big events like the Cultural Revolution, and that has to do with some form of shame. But it struck me when you were reading that passage that it can't just be about money. It can't just be about love. It's about all the other things that lie beneath that. It's about self-esteem. So I think, particularly when you set these two men, and you paint them so well, you set these two men in contrast to each other, it is about how one makes the other feel. It's not about the fact that he just has more money. It's about how this other person who should be inferior to me makes me feel inferior. And that's, I think, how so many people relate to each other. In particularly, you see that in sharp relief in Asia today.
How much was this also about kind of and Asian, in a sense, consuming their own? Because I mean, a lot has been written and said about the fact that the prosecutor who prosecuted Rajat Gupta was also an Indian American who was also born outside of India, Preet Bharara. Born in India, Preet Bharara, and that kind of him wanting to show that his loyalty to his adopted home, that he's a real American, and I know you've mentioned that the defense that Rajaratnam and Gupta had put up was saying that it's, there's some element of racism here. But I mean, certainly one can make the argument that there's some element of selective prosecution here.
And certainly since this case, Preet has brought 2 other cases that would suggest there definitely is some element of selective prosecution. The Devyani Gorbagadi case, and of course Dinesh D'Souza last week. I think again in the United States, there's this real divide between Indians who come from India, I think they're called OTBs or FTBs, the fresh off the boats or the off the boats, and the Indians who've grown up in the United States, the ABCDs, the American-born crazy Desis. And
Confused.
Or confused Desis, sorry.
But they can be crazy too.
Okay. And Preet is definitely an ABCD. He was born in India, but he came to America when he was 2. And just knowing Preet and watching him, certainly during the Rajat case, he really looks at this, all these cases as just